Welcome everybody as you begin to join this webinar, which we're running from the Walkley Foundation, thanks to the wonderful support of Telum Media. I'm going to hand over to John Bergen from Telum, who will get us started. Over to you, John.
Right. Hello, everybody. Might give it a moment or two just for people to file in. While they're doing so, I'm more than happy to give a brief introduction to myself. So, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for giving up your busy lunch times, your much coveted lunch times to join us for this webinar today. I am John Bergen. I'm from Telum Media. Now, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm participating in today's webinar from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating on the call today. If you're not familiar with us, Telum Media is all about creating connections. We bring together journalists and communications professionals through our media contacts database, events and information services. Now, we cover the entire Asia-Pacific region and we keep you informed with industry developments. We promote job opportunities. We help source expert contacts from our extensive network. In short, we are here to help. And that's why we're delighted to support this webinar presented by the Walkley Foundation for Journalism to equip publishers with the knowledge and the tools to diversify their revenue. Now, we all know the importance of journalism. News keeps us connected with what the world offers. It can be interesting, it can be provocative, it can be entertaining, but above all, news empowers us through knowledge. But the news industry can't do this, of course, without long-lasting sources of income. Publishers need money to keep the lights on, to pay staff, and to produce quality journalism. And we all know, of course, that the media landscape has undergone significant transformation in the digital age, and no doubt there are more bumps ahead, from platform competition to economic uncertainty to generative AI, the list goes on. Many newsroom leaders are left to navigate this journey on their own, and that's not fair. And it's not always clear where to go for information, but it doesn't have to be this way. So we put our heads together with the Walkley Foundation and came up with this webinar, because when journalism succeeds, I think we can all agree that we all do better. I'm really, really looking forward to hearing from our panel today. You couldn't ask for a better set of experts. They'll be sharing sources, inspiration, and examples to help media organizations take control of their financial future. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'll hand over to Corinne from the Walkley Foundation, your wonderful host for this webinar.
Thanks so much, John. And thank you also to, as you say, everyone who's giving up their lunchtime for this session. I see quite a few names that I recognise in the participant group. What I would ask those of you who are joining us today, you can use the chat box. Just make sure when you open up the chat that you scroll down from, instead of host and panelists, just choose everyone, and you can message us and each other in that space. And it would be lovely if you take a moment to introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining us from, and of course, any questions that you have for our wonderful panelists, who I will introduce immediately. So very warm welcome in alphabetical order to Becca Aaronson, who is the co-founder and chief product officer with the News Product Alliance, and Becca's joining us from the United States. Anna Draffin, who is the CEO of the Public Interest Journalism Initiative, and Associate Professor Caroline Fisher, who's with the News Media Research Centre at the University of Canberra, and is one of the co-authors of the annual Reuters Digital News Report, the Australia edition, which is coming up in a couple of months. So I'm super excited by, I have to say, an all-female panel, unintentional, but here we are. And so, Anna, I would like to start with you. The format of it will be, I'll come to each of you in turn, and then we'll have questions at the end. There'll be a bit of screen sharing going on. So just very much aiming for as much information and guidance to go to folks who are on the call as possible. So, Anna, over to you.
Thanks, Corinne. Great to be here.
So let's start off with the Public Interest Journalism Initiative, PIJI. How would you describe its purpose and core areas of work for those who haven't had a chance to really dig into what it is and what it does?
So we're an independent think tank that is focused on the sustainability and diversity of the news ecosystem in Australia. So we have very much a macro view We are independent and neutral, so we don't represent any industry interests, nor do we represent government interests, nor digital platform interests. So we sit at the nexus of all the different contributors to public interest journalism, and what our focus is on is how do we maximise the end benefit for the community. So it's really looking through that prism of news as a public good and understanding that it's essential to a functioning democracy, and how, therefore, do we go about making it as sustainable and as diverse as possible.
How would you describe the day-to-day activities at Pidgey?
So our core work is very much focused on the economics of the news market. So over the last 5 years, one of the core areas of research that we've undertaken has been mapping and indexing the Australian news market. So that's developed where we have captured new data every single month. And over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of market volatility, which I'll talk about in due course, but that has become an incredibly rich source of data that is informing industry in terms of opportunities and challenges, but more importantly, informing policy as governments, the Australian government, but equally governments around the world are contemplating how do they engage and support news as a public good.
Excellent. And we will get onto that in a moment. But in the first instance, it would be wonderful. There are some really rich resources on the Pidgey website. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind perhaps just sharing your screen for a moment to talk us through what's there, where to find things.
Thanks, Corinne. So just talking to our main, can everyone see that easily? Talking to our main work. So this is back on our homepage. There's lots of resources here, but if you look at the Australian News Data Project, there's 4 key components to this project. So firstly, the mapping visualizations, the news index, the news sampling project, and our monthly and quarterly reports, which is that granular capture. Now, I'll talk you through some of the visualizations just to give you some flavour. Just bear with me a moment while I rearrange my screen so I can actually reach the buttons. So this is the work that Pidgey's been doing over the last 5 years in terms of local news markets, where we've gone into every local government area across our vast geography and mapped it according to whether there's print or digital news producers in that region, and then from a broadcast point of view, whether there's radio or television. So that's one large piece of mapping that we've done. So previously there wasn't a single database of news production and availability across Australia. And then the second part, which you'll all appreciate, particularly given the COVID years, is that we have been tracking market contractions and expansions. So you can see, so this is showing you can roll over and see individual news outlets and what's been affected and the date of that impact. Over here on the left-hand side, you can actually see the histogram, this being the peak of contractions, which no surprise was during the early years, quarters of COVID. And then what you've seen is slight green shoot recovery, but more pressingly is the last 6 quarters, we've seen sequential quarters of net decline. So we're heading back into probably what is the post-COVID era and probably returning to that just gradual net decline that we know that news markets around the world have been suffering from over the last decade or more.
Thank you. Sorry, please go on.
No, and just this is one other thing for those of interest. You can by all means go into this. This is our Australian News Index. Go in and just do a search on your own outlet and you'll see the data that we collect with regard to each news outlet. More than happy at any stage to get feedback and commentary on the way in which your news outlet may be listed in our data.
Thanks, Anna. And one of the questions I suppose that comes to my mind is, are you beginning to map or thinking about mapping along the lines of different approaches to business models?
So obviously that's a a key area of interest. And as we look forward, what Pidgey is envisaging is a much broader joined up analysis of the news market, where you can bring together the news supply with news demand, but also look to what we're calling the integrity markers. So those specific characteristics that set news aside from other types of news of information sources, so that the general public have a broader understanding of the special nature of news and the ways in which news can be used more productively.
Thank you. We are obviously also right now in the context of Meta's recent announcement to withdraw from commercial deals with news media. What does that perhaps provide as a context for outlets that need to be developing business strategies into 2025?
So certainly there is a lot of concern with regard to Meta's withdrawal. So firstly, there's obviously just a clear loss of revenue. An estimated $70 million will depart the Australian news market within the next 6 months and won't return. But perhaps more the hidden cost is the referral traffic impact. So if we look to the Canadian experience, where Meta has switched off news across all its platforms in August last year, the estimates we're getting is anywhere between 20 to 50% loss of traffic for news outlets. Now, if you're already borderline in terms of your commercial viability, that's obviously catastrophic in terms of audience impact, and it's immediate as well. So it's not going to give you an opportunity to recalibrate your business. So certainly our concern in looking at the broader market, and particularly in the Australian context, there's just over 1,200 news outlets across the country. 88% of those operate at a local news scale. So they are the most vulnerable in that they have been the hardest hit over the last 5 years in terms of market volatility. And then again, if we segment by region, it's rural and regional Australia that's had the greatest degree of contractions at that local news scale. So certainly would be encouraging newsrooms to be thinking about how you diversify your audience across firstly across different social media platforms, not being reliant on Meta-only products. Secondly, to distinguish your traffic referral between search engines versus social media. It is likely that other social media platforms may look to follow Meta's lead in terms of switching off news, whereas search engines are highly reliant on having large volumes of quality information available to drive their products. So it's a more robust referral system for news. But equally, what we've observed over the last 3 years in particular is more news organisations building that direct engagement with their audience, be it via subscription services or other events, webinars, etc. So really, how do you have that direct engagement with your audience is going to be a key component to setting yourself apart, particularly in an era of AI where we're all going to be inundated with all sorts of dirty information, and so trusted sources will become of increasing import.
Thank you. And you've just reminded me that I've seen quite a few news outlets that I follow in terms of their pages on platforms like LinkedIn, stepping up their marketing of subscriptions and also apps in the last few weeks, which has been really interesting and actually has been a catalyst for me taking out a few subscriptions. So I think it's, there's the doom and gloom, and then there's also what can we actually do in response to these things, which is sort of next steps. You mentioned Canada. If we could just hop the fence over for a moment to America, there's a lot of interest and growth there in not-for-profit news models. How applicable is that to the Australian context?
So Becca will have great insight
here. She will, and we'll come back to that more shortly, yes.
And obviously, in terms of the US context, not-for-profit news models are the fastest growing segment in the market, so they're the bright spot. And just to give you a sense of scale, there's a group of 22 US foundations that have recently combined to a $500 million investment in local news media in the US over the next 5 years. So they're in with a view to having impact and at scale and at pace, which is incredible. So in talking to many of those foundations in recent weeks, they're looking to get that money. It was only announced in September last year. There's money out the door already out to market. So that's how quickly philanthropic capital can respond to need. And from our work, from Pidgey's work in Australia, we have researched the appetite in the Australian philanthropic market for news, and there is increasing appetite to fund, and we have seen that through the likes of AAP, The Guardian, The Conversation in recent years. The major distinction for the Australian context is at the moment in our charities law, public interest journalism isn't recognised as a charitable purpose. So to give you a sense of the type of work that Pidgey does, that is precisely the sort of work we are working with the Productivity Commission and with the federal government to actually get changes of legislation and tax deductibility so that there will be a future for driving a deliberate development of a not-for-profit news market in Australia, which is particularly useful for small markets where they're not looking to scale, they're just looking to service their community. They have deep engagement to the community. A non-profit model is potentially an ideal solution.
Thank you so much, and fingers crossed. We might move on to Caroline, if that's okay. Caroline is a co-author of the annual Reuters Digital News Report Australia edition, is also working with the News Media Research Centre in Canberra. Caroline, I know you also have some resources that you'd like to share with us, some of the findings from work that you're doing at the News and Media Research Centre. So I'll hand over to you to present the slide deck that you've prepared.
Okay, sure. All right, well, just let me quickly share those slides and hopefully it'll all go smoothly. Let's, is that going to the full slide? Yeah, great. Okay, so title slide, let's move on from there. One of the things Corinne asked us to prepare was some resources that we use and find reliable, particularly in this instance about monetising journalism. So I've got top 4. Splice Media, they're based in Singapore. They are fantastic. They have 2 terrific email newsletters, Splice Slugs and Splice Frames, and they look at all business issues, and their whole raison d'etre is about, you know, making media viable. So they're terrific, particularly putting Australia in a global context. That's great. Unmade, Tim Burrows, the founder of Mumbrella, he started Unmade, which again includes news media businesses, but also media in general. Fantastic daily newsletter. You can get access to small bits of information for free, but subscribe for more. Neiman Lab, good international perspective, out of Harvard Uni, focus on journalism. They have a specific section on business models, which is great. And of course, all of the stuff that's produced by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford is fantastic. And again, their focus is the future of journalism. Okay, which takes me to this this next slide, really. As Corinne mentioned, at the News and Media Research Centre, we are the Australian partner with the Reuters Institute in Oxford to produce an annual report on digital news consumption. And we've been doing that for 11 years now. So I'll just show you a couple of key findings from last year's report. I can't show you this year. I'd have to kill you. We're just crunching the data now. It's been in the field. We're just analysing it now and starting to write it up, and it'll be out in June. But it is the world's biggest ongoing survey, and the strength of it is that it's globally comparative. It's fantastic. The same questions are asked across 46 markets, and so that's just invaluable to see Australian trends in a global context. Okay, so if you hadn't noticed, unfortunately, interest in news has been declining, and you can see there over the last, from 2016 to 2023, a big, almost 10%, more than a 10% decline. And you can see then on the right-hand side a shift in preference of platforms for news consumption. TV is still king, but it's declining. Online is second. Social media is pretty steady, but of course radio and print, no surprises there. Heading south. We find that news in Australia is incredibly gendered. news consumption. It's the most gendered actually in the global survey of 46 nations, 46 markets. So you can see there that men have much higher levels of interest in news than women. They access it more, they trust it more, they understand it better. It's really quite extraordinary, the gendered nature of news consumption here. We did a special report on that last year, actually. As far as social goes, you know, Facebook again is still king, but declining. And of course, in the we won't see it so much in this year's report because their decision to withdraw from news won't have activated until after our survey was in the field this year. But in the 2025 report, we'll really see the impacts of that. So Facebook, yeah, declining, and YouTube rising. So Instagram has been growing, but again, that'll be very different in the 2025 report, TikTok growing, etc. But all of these, of course, are terribly variable depending on algorithm changes. And paying for news, which comes to the heart of the webinar today. So we've been tracking that for a very long time, and people's preparedness to pay for news in Australia has been growing since we've been doing the survey. So we're now at about 22% of the participants in the survey said that they've been paying for online news in one way or another, which is great, and you can see that that's above the global average. And some of that growth has been amongst younger cohorts, but particularly among men. Men are the biggest news consumers. And again, the main driver is about quality, really is about, people are prepared to pay for quality news services. Some people, about a third say they want to fund good journalism, but fundamentally it's about quality, and that they can't get that quality from free sources. And you can see at the bottom there, these other additional options like games and puzzles, etc. Yeah, they're part of it, but they're not the biggest driver. Yes, of those people who don't pay, which is, nearly 80% of people, a fifth of them said that they would pay if it were cheaper. And others said, if things were bundled, if there was more option, if they paid for one thing, but they got a lot more for bang for their buck, that they might consider it as well. But again, the bulk of the non-payers still won't pay no matter what you do or offer them, which is a reflection of low interest and falling interest in news. And again, we saw in the cost of living crisis, the people who were hit hardest by that they were the most likely to cut their subscriptions, which is not surprising. So that was from last year's digital news report. And we'll ask some of those questions again this year, so the longitudinal data will continue. But we've done a lot of other research as well about, okay, well, what are you prepared to pay for? What impacts your decision? So the way to do that in research is to do things called choice models, and we've done several of these. This first one is just very quickly about local news consumers. It was funded by Google, and it was looking at what would drive people, what would they be interested in to pay for in a local area, especially if they didn't have news, if their local service had closed. And very few people, well, about a third of people said that they'd be prepared to pay for something, but very little. Okay, so look, up to $5 a month, it's not a lot. So yes, people want news, they're prepared to pay for it, but they're not prepared to pay a lot for it. And even if they're being offered quite a lot. Now, this is in a regional area and in some ways slightly depressed areas, so that will be different in metro areas. But this was an interesting study and eye-opening. Again, the factor that was driving those people's decision was about quality. And in local community, very much about whether or not that news organisation was going to make a contribution to that community, a positive contribution to that community. So that was also very interesting to see that, which you don't get so much in metro communities. Now, in the 2019 digital news report, we gave people a choice. Okay, you've got three choices, subscriptions, what would you take out first, news, video streaming, audio streaming, etc. And only 9% of people would choose to subscribe to news above anything else. So it's very small. Most people would choose to subscribe to a video streaming service. And that, we gave them three choices, and, news was always at the end. So that's the thing that people will cut first if they're wanting to cut back on subscriptions. Now, we are looking at another project that I'm on, and this is the last one I'll talk about. It's called the Valuing News Project. It's an Australian Research Council discovery project. It's being led by Professor Terry Flew at the University of Sydney. And it's called Valuing News, Aligning Individual, Institutional and Societal Perspectives. And because what we can see from all of our data from the Digital News Report globally and nationally, and what's happening, you know, PIGI's research, they're the supply side, we're the demand side, is that people's assessment of news and its role in people's lives is changing. And so we're really trying to look at that in this project and find out, well, what's driving that. And as part of this project, we've done a conjoint analysis. So this is hot off the presses. This data, it hasn't been published anywhere. This is only a very sneak peek. There's more, but I can't share that with you yet. But this is, we did a complex conjoint analysis, giving people a lot of options about different types of news to pay for, different utilities that they would offer, etc., and how much would they pay. And I know this looks complex, but just to you know, just look at the short and the long lines, and that kind of tells the story. That basically people, you know, one title was the baseline here. So if you add up to 5 titles, well, you can see that there's a boost there. But up to 5 titles, yep, there's some added utility there, and so people are prepared to pay for that. That seems to have, you know, financial value. Up to 10, there's not such a boost, you know. So you think, yeah, well, what's the there's not, you know, it's probably not worth it. 5 titles is probably the optimum there. Particular types of content, well, local adds, you know, is the most adds the most utility there to the people. Non-news content, games with the most, you know, again, slightly more, but not huge utility. When you look across to the bonus services, it's streaming. Okay, video streaming is king, followed by music streaming, and people would prefer things to be ad-free. Oh well, and monthly subscription is kind of seen to be, you know, the optimum form of subscription, and then, you know, paying about $13 a month there. 40 was the baseline, but there seemed to be some uplift there in reducing that price. So look, these are just indicators, you know, don't take it as read, but we have a lot more analysis to do with this. But this does support, you know, some of the other research that we've been doing. And what it really tells us is that, you know, bundling news with other things is the answer. The problem with the viability of news is that we unbundled it. We unbundled it from advertising and other things, you know. Why is TV still popular? TV news still popular? Because it's the stuff on either side of it that people are watching, you know. News just happens to be in the middle of the game show and whatever else comes afterwards, the fishing show. You know, it's news has never been a product that's been viable on its own. And I don't know why we've pretended that we can make it happen all of a sudden in this era. It's very hard. And as we're finding, we're really struggling to do it. So all of our research is telling us that bundling is part of the answer for future viability. Talking to part of this ARC discovery is talking to industry leaders, editors and CFOs, etc. So again, multi-revenue streams are needed, not to rely on any. So subscription, advertising, sponsored content, and other things like hosting events, masterclasses, conferences, and trying to, you know, broaden your appeal, broaden your audience through value-added products like email newsletters, podcasts, etc., which you can see everyone's doing. Now, they may not be charging for those things, but they will get people through the door so that you can encourage them. If they like what they see, then they may well pay. And of course, if you've got a particular niche product where you can do a business-to-business type of arrangement, that's very lucrative and provides a real underpinning, you know, financial stability for some news outlets, particularly for outlets that, you know, specialise in financial news and things like that. But that's not going to work for everybody. So that's kind of the key takeaways from that project. That's a bit of a romp. There's some references at the end. Okay, I'll stop sharing. That was a bit of a bomb of information. But you can have those slides and hopefully some of that's useful to people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Caroline, I've got a couple of questions for you, and I will also open it up to other members of the panel who may have questions, particularly about that new research that you've just presented. I suppose a question that comes to my mind consuming the Reuters Institute output and have done for many years, there's been quite a bit of work looking at what younger audiences are interested in, and how, let's say, Gen Z, to sort of broad brush that age group, define news. And it sits inside, it's a much broader category of types of information than what we might call news. And I also want to, I guess, revisit and dig into a little bit what you've talked about with regard to gender and news. So for these kinds of studies, how are you defining news? And is that definition sitting alongside how old school journos define news, politics, business, sport, or is it that broader range?
Okay, so that question's to me
Yeah.
in particular. Yeah. So in the Reuters study, there is a definition off the top of my head. I can't say it to you verbatim, but it is basically mainstream news. Okay, so news that is produced by mainstream news outlets, and that tend to be around those mainstream news topics. So yes, it is a fairly mainstream news definition. I totally take your point about that it's changing. We're doing other research, and in fact I've got a paper coming out on the changing definition of news, which will be out any minute, which I'll happily share with everybody. Yes, that is certainly morphing, but it is interesting when you do ask people about news. There is also still a broad understanding that a lot of people do see news still within that sort of mainstream kind of arena. Albeit they also seek news and information from a whole range of other places. So look, it's definitely changing. But yeah, on the whole, it's that sort of generic mainstream definition.
Okay. Well, let's perhaps go on to Becca Aaronson's presentation. Then we can have a bit of a chat amongst each other, including asking each other questions, if that's okay. Becca, you're, co-founded the News Product Alliance, I think 2019, born at a conference, if I remember rightly.
Yes, we had a conference called SourceCon Product in February of 2020, which, if you might recall, was a pretty pivotal moment in all of our lives. And so shortly after that, the pandemic started, and I was leading a steering committee that was trying to get a group of 150 people to keep this momentum going on building a community for news product thinkers and news product practitioners.
Thank you. And so the News Product Alliance, I mean, I've always been so excited by it as a concept because it's really helped me change my mindset around reconceptualizing editorial output as one of many products and thinking about how to align those with who might consume them, whether that's to do so for free or for a price, and other products that might exist alongside that to support the journalism initiative. So I know you've prepared a slide deck. I'll hand over to you to go through that, if that's okay.
Yes, I'd love to.
Fantastic. So we can spread a bit more of the word. I think it's there's perhaps a bit of some good news would be a good way to go into the second half of this session.
Yes. So for anyone who's interested, you can find more information about everything that I'm talking about at newsproduct.org. So our mission at the News Product Alliance is to elevate the discipline of news product management and expand the diversity of people in these news product roles. We believe that news product thinkers are the people who are aligning strategically business, audience, and technology goals while integrating journalism ethics to solve these problems that we've all just been talking about. We think that they're really the industry leaders of tomorrow, and they're key to building sustainable and ethical news organizations that know how to serve the needs of their communities. So we have a global community of more than 3,000 practitioners with members from various organizations all around the world, including tech and media companies. Almost half of our community is outside of North America, so we would love to have more Australians represented as well. In our Slack community, you can find people talking about things from hey, I'm having trouble with my Google Analytics. Can someone help me solve this problem? To we're thinking about rolling out games. What vendors do you use? Or like, hey, I'm trying to figure out a newsletter solution for this audience. And so everyone is there kind of giving solutions and helping kind of share resources with each other. We also have a variety of training programs. We offer monthly events that are free for community members. And we also have the first of its kind news product management certification program, which is a 3.5-month long deep dive into becoming a news product leader for mid to senior level news professionals who want to become these problem solvers or who are already doing this work and want to kind of fine tune their skills. We also offer an annual summit, which has 500 participants globally. And this year's was going to be in October. So I hope all of you could join. So in case you're asking, what is news product thinking? Why is this important? We're all familiar with the traditional news model of business and editorial and the kind of church and state divide that separates them. But in reality, today's news organizations are much more complex. We need to incorporate decisions about technology and audience needs if we really want to build sustainable businesses that serve the information needs of our communities. And so you have to have someone that kind of builds these bridges operationally. News products can take many forms, from your print newspaper to a podcast or even your social media distribution strategy. Your content strategy, of course, fits within that. And product management is the function within an organization to guide the development of these products and your strategy to make sure that you are aligning the editorial needs with the audience needs, what tech is available and resources are available, and the business interests. So you're being sustainable in doing all of this. We have to make strategic choices because, as we all know, resources in news are limited. And so it's really key that we have people who can solve these problems. And today's most successful newsrooms have done this. And so we really think that every newsroom needs product leadership and a culture that supports them so that they can lead collaborative problem solving. And so that's what the News Product Alliance is there for, is to help support these leaders and build that community of support around them so that they can continue to further the interest of our news industry at large. So what does this look like in practice? In news organizations that have successfully incorporated product management, you'll see things like audience-focused goal setting. You'll see cross-team collaboration. People are working together across disciplines. You'll see very clear and shared business objectives, and you'll see a mindset of data-guided and iterative processes, the idea that we are constantly learning and we constantly need to adapt. And so what can we incorporate from our failures to future successes? And I love this quote that someone from our community, Tom Horgan, actually said at one of our early summits, which was, putting our audience at the center of what we do is a form of disruption. I think in traditional news, we often think of, the editor at the top who's making the story and deciding kind of what matters to the community and then disseminating that information. And what we're really seeing now is that people have different kinds of information needs, and they have different behaviors in the way that they expect to consume and find news. And if we really want to serve the public interest in providing accurate information to community members when and where they need it most, we have to adapt to them. And we have to think about how to get to the story to them in the way that they're going to receive it. And so this is a real disruption in the way that we've traditionally thought about creating our news models. But it's important that we think about kind of how do we solve problems that put the audience in our community at the center of the solution, and then start to incorporate, okay, well, how do we adapt to new technology? We all are talking about AI these days. It's rapidly changing audience behaviors. It's yet another thing that we're going to need to adapt to in how we think about the creation and distribution of our news. So the product people are the people in your newsroom who are trying to think about those things and solve those problems. And we need more diversity among all of our leadership in news. this is something that we take really seriously at the MPA, and we strive really hard to help kind of prop up a new generation of leaders who can represent our communities. If you look at the research, there's growing and growing distrust in news. And a lot of the times it's because people don't see themselves in the story, or there's a history of misrepresentation or harm done to those communities. And so it's really important that when we're thinking of problems that we're trying to solve, that we have diverse representation in product leadership and in those communities to rebuild that trust, because we all have a tendency to focus on the problems that affect us. And so having a diverse team in race, gender, orientation, class, generation, geography, all of those things help us become more aware of problems that we should be addressing, and think of solutions that are more innovative, creative, and distinct. So if you'd like to become part of our community, we would love to have you. You can join our Slack at newsproduct.org/Slack. And other things that you can find from our resources include our product kit, which is an introductory level kind of guide to news product management that you can either use yourself or share with colleagues whom you might be trying to bring into this conversation. We also have a resource library that's curated by people in the news profession, and has case studies on things that have worked, as well as like resources and frameworks and tools that might be relevant for your news organization. We do monthly events. Our summit this year is going to be in October, so we'll be sending out more information about that this summer. And most importantly, we're about to open applications for our second news product management certification program. So if you'd like to hone your skills in this area, I highly encourage you to look into this program. So
Okay, thank you so much. Let's sort of work backwards on that, if we may. And this is also a moment. I know it's always a bit messy in webinars if people want to talk over the top of each other, but I'm in the presence of greatness, and so I would really encourage Becca and Caroline and Anna to ask each other questions, and also John. What would be the learning outcomes if you attend the News Product Alliance certification program? What would you come away from that with?
yeah, the main thing that we want to teach in this program is kind of how to think strategically about solving problems. So like one of the things that they work on is they have a capstone presentation, and at the end they're supposed to articulate the value proposition of the products that they're creating, and how they would kind of share that decision with stakeholders across their organization. So we learn about things like how to conduct and incorporate audience research, how to think about user experience design, how to do data analysis more effectively, how to work with engineers and designers and other people on your team, how to communicate effectively with stakeholders, and then how to present your ideas clearly and effectively. So kind of we go through the whole product development cycle.
Thank you. Caroline and Anna, do you have questions or points that you'd like to return to in response to each other's presentations? I couldn't ask you all questions for hours, but I just want to open up space.
Thanks, Anna. It's really interesting to hear about your business. I mean, I was just reflecting, though, on the fact that we call it news product, rather than content. I mean, it's such a shift, isn't it? I mean, not only how we define news, but the way that we are thinking about it in this terribly commodified way, and how that's shifting our thinking. Where's our values thinking about what we do when we're thinking about it as products? It just churns away for me.
I'd like to chime in and just draw Caroline and Becca respective work together, because from our perspective, Gen AI offers a bit of a course reset. We've had 20 years of experimentation with digital platforms as unavoidable trading partners. As one colleague dryly reflected yesterday, we're 10 years too late to assume that we can't engage with social media. And indeed, irrespective of Meta's future market position in Australia, if you're a new market entrant, you have to use social media platforms to drive audience. That's where the audiences are. So in thinking about Gen AI, Becca, really curious to hear where you see opportunity, and Caroline, you too, in terms of that bundling, because we see that there are many more digital platforms interested in Gen AI, so there's a lot more competition amongst them, which is fantastic, a bit more of a level playing field. But equally, we keep coming back to the unique characteristics of news, as I said earlier, as a distinct source of information that should be a premium product. So there's commercial opportunity here. Where are you seeing the opportunity, Becca? And Caroline, where are you seeing the opportunity in terms of contemplating bundled services and products?
I think that there's a variety of ways, and they come in many different directions. I mean, one thing that we're going to see is people are going to need verification of things that are created by generative AI. And so they're going to be looking for trusted sources to do that verification process. And some of it is ultimately going to happen on social platforms. You know, you're going to have YouTube try and flag things, but you're also going to need external sources. And I think that's a role that news organizations should play, but it requires them to have the technology and the advancements within their organizations to do that work. And then I also think you're going to see it used to kind of like change the way we do investigative journalism. There's already some great projects that have come out where you see people using like generative AI to, you know, like I saw one that was like to scan images from Google around the world to find where there's like still lead within the cabling in certain neighborhoods, and then connecting that to like community demographics of who's being most affected by potential lead poisoning. So like things like that, that like we can really use it to tell stories in more complex and important ways.
One of the questions I have, sorry, Caroline, you were just about to say something.
No, look, I mean, it's a great question, Anna. And as to how you would bundle, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. It's a really interesting opportunity. And I don't have an immediate answer for it, but it absolutely needs exploration because it is potentially an opportunity for sure.
Yeah, when I worked at the news organization Chalkbeat that does education news, my boss, Allison Go, had what she referred to as our Mars mission, our mission aligned revenue stuff. And the whole idea was that we need to start thinking of creating products maybe outside of our core news that will support the news because the news won't pay for itself, right? So like what can we do that's going to be aligned with the work that we're doing, but and serves our community, but actually generates revenue. And that's where I think product thinking is really important and key, right? Because it's like, how do I connect our editorial mission and our product strategy and also serve the needs of our audience in different diverse ways that will keep our business going? And so sometimes you have to think really creatively and outside the box, and definitely it can be a unique solution depending on where you are in the world and who you're serving.
Yeah.
And one of the things that interests me about the group of people that are on this call is we have Anna and Caroline doing research work and research distribution work. And Becca, if I can put it in these terms, perhaps disseminating what we know, and also, capturing workplace applications of, what am I trying to say? Do you know what I mean? Trying to understand the implementation of what we understand. If I take a step back, in academia, there's this concept of research, translation, and uptake, which is a concept that I didn't learn about at school or at university or in a newsroom ever. I learned about it on a development project. But it was about translating what we're finding out through research into practice. And I'd be just interested to get a sense, perhaps, Caroline, I might start with you, because the Reuters Digital News Report is trying to drive practice with research. How well are we doing, and how do we need to do don't want to say better, but to plug what we're finding into practice perhaps quickly and efficiently?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. There's about, broader consumption for public consumption and really simplifying, these, if anyone's seen the reports, there's huge amounts of data in them, and depends on your audience. We tend to focus on policy providers, and so we go into great depth to give them longitudinal data for policy purposes, and we find that that's very effective and it's used a lot. And I know that the Reuters do this as well, but we do a lot of briefings for individual companies, and we go through and we tailor our findings for their needs, and they find that very useful. And we do see direct translation actually of the findings, that they are very conscious of trends and what's going on, and we can see changes in what they're doing, because not just of our data, but what's happening, the quantum of data that's out there that's pointing about these new directions. But as far as what are the 10 takeaways out of the report? Look, we could do better at that. I mean, yes, what are the 10 things you could do in your newsroom as a result of this report? We do have an executive summary. I guess we could try and make it punchier and put it out there. Yeah, we could work on that for sure. We do a lot of stuff in the conversation, so we do try to translate it out, into the public, so that there are tangible forums, more accessible forums for the information. But yeah, we can always do more.
It's not so much, it's it was a long and messy question, because I'm not trying to be, it's not a critical thing, it's more just how do we get this to work more effectively, perhaps. Anna, be interested to see your thoughts around the news organisations that you're engaging with, and perhaps how organisations like the Walkley Foundation, as well as researchers, can be more effective in how we can assist them to maybe not reinvent wheels,
Yeah, look, that's precisely it. We're all dealing with scarce resource, and so for Pidgey, we're a sort of companion piece to academia, in that we're a civil society we're looking to fill the data gaps quickly and practically. So we spend a lot of time with industry. You can imagine my phone's running hot at the moment just with Meta's announcement. So we're really trying to understand what the practical challenges are in the lived experience. Our focus is very much around, at the moment, safeguarding the news supply, because it has been in such steep decline and just accelerated through COVID. But that being said, we also purposely publish all our data as in the most open and accessible ways that we can. I do media every week, because ultimately we also need community to own the solutions. And so for them to have a heightened level of awareness of what's actually happening in terms of their local news market, and to drive the solutions around what their needs are, because there's no one size that fits all for each community. And one community might desperately want a newspaper, be it digital, print, or both, and another community might prefer radio as their main source, or a combination thereof. And I think in the digital era, it also depends on their digital connectivity, the levels of digital literacy within the demographics of that community, the socioeconomic disadvantage that sits in the community that might create price barriers to subscription services. So there's a multitude of issues that face each community. And I think in 2024, that focus on consumer-led, but I would say community-led. It's a civil society approach to a democracy. Yes, as individuals, we all have preferences within that, but it is also important to think about the collective spirit of it.
Thank you so much. Caroline, you're nodding.
There's a question in the chat. Simon's been very active. Hi, Simon. And feels a lot of the work being done is in large news organisations. I agree. But one thing I've learned quickly is that business models don't necessarily downscale. Okay. And then you've asked, are there any successful regional suburban sandpits where academia is working with live newsrooms to improve sustainability? So Anna's probably got a better overview. My quick response to this is, we've done a little bit around that, and we did do some work which was funded by Google about what do regional newsrooms need and journalists need. We did that a couple of years ago. That was very interesting, and about training and other things, which I can put a link to that report if that interests you. But there's work being done in Victoria, out of Deakin, I think, with Christy Hess is leading some work with local newspapers, isn't she, in Victoria, looking at sustainability and things. So yes, there is some stuff going on in Victoria.
Yes. And so Alex has just noted there's a couple of big research projects going on.
Christy.
Christy has some work by TJ, and it's short for TJ Thompson, THOMSON at RMIT. Yep. There's also some, just really quickly, there's also some work with the ABC. I met some folks at the Journalism Education and Research Association conference, longest title ever, JERA, in December, who were doing some work with to support regional mastheads. And that was a very interesting new collaboration emerging between the ABC and regional media. Sorry, Anna.
So again, Christy Hess at Deakin is involved in the ARC project with the ABC. I think the other thing I would also point to is the emergence of peaks for small to mediums over the last 3 years, which weren't active. So Country Press Australia's membership has certainly increased over the last 3 years, but equally there's the local independent news association that's also popped up.
Lena.
The Digital Publishers Alliance and a number of other collectives. So, my advice to small news outlets is going it alone is tough and lonely. And, like Becca has amassed a community in terms of shared knowledge, and just look at the comments about the impact that your Slack channel, Becca, has, just some of those practical resources that you get from operating and belonging to a peak body. I would really encourage people to reach out and look for those resources. And, it's often just affirming to know that your experience is not novel.
Yeah, thanks for that. We actually hear that quite a lot from our members, that joining our community helps them feel less alone, and like they have a name for the work that they're doing, and community of people that kind of gets it and can talk to them about their work in a more detailed and expansive way. So
it's also uplifting. I mean, none of what we've talked about over the past hour is the stuff of happy, joy. And I think it's really, it's really important to just acknowledge the emotional toll that takes on people who are trying to run not just sustainable businesses to keep people in jobs, but also to uphold the fourth estate. Both of those things are, difficult and challenging things to do in the current environment. And really, one of the reasons why we wanted to bring the three of you together is to reassure people that there are a lot of folks trying to fight this battle, and there are places to go for information and guidance and support and tips and training, which is important. I might just ask a final comment from any of you if you feel moved to do so. I'm very excited about the News Product Alliance certificate program opening next week. Becca, is that open to everybody anywhere?
yes, it's global. So it's open to everyone everywhere.
Fantastic. Caroline, any closing comments from yourself?
Well, I was just interested, Becca, are you doing, is anyone doing any academic research or, evaluative research about your, the work that you're doing with organisations to look at what's working and what's not, I mean, that would also be fascinating.
Not currently. Cindy Royal at Texas State University did do a research study on our community in the early days. I don't know if you followed her work, but it's great. And Damon Kiesau actually just published a textbook on product management and news, which is also a great resource.
Great, thanks.
But if you're interested, we can talk.
Okay.
Well, we might just gently wrap up there if that's okay, folks. I know we're sort of heading towards the end of the lunch break, so thank you all so very, very much. So we've been hearing from Becca Aaronson, co-founder and chief product officer with the News Product Alliance in the US. Anna
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, thank you for joining us. It's wonderful, and also for persisting into a late evening in America. Anna Draffend, CEO at the Public Interest Journalism Initiative. and Associate Professor Caroline Fisher with the News Media Research Centre in Canberra.
Thanks so much, Corinne.
And thanks also, of course, to Telum Media for kindly supporting this session. We wouldn't be able to do it without you, so very, very grateful. Thanks to John Bergen for joining us today.
Great pleasure. Thank you very much.
And a copy of the recording and all resources will be shared as always. So thank you again for the time and have a great day.